Will it be a coronation or a contest to be our next Prime Minister? Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak has the support of the majority of MPs in his party, but Penny Mordaunt isn't out of the race yet. Her campaign claim she's closing in, so will she pass the 100 supporter threshold to force a ballot amongst Conservative Party members? We will find out in around half an hour or so if she makes it over the line and if they will go head to head. We will bring you that announcement live at around 2 o'clock. Meanwhile, what are the markets making of all this after the turbulence under Truss? We'll be live from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland on a significant day for all the nations. And we've heard from MPs and indeed Tory party members. So what do voters make of it all?
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Tom Bradby in Downing Street.
Good afternoon from Downing Street once again. We are on air with a special extended programme and what is yet another historic day in the destiny of our country. Nominations for the top job at number 10 close in about half an hour at 2 p.m. and we will bring you that announcement live. What we do know is that our next Prime Minister will be either Rishi Sunak or Penny Mordaunt. He has already secured the backing of the majority of Tory MPs, but will she gain enough support to keep herself in the leadership race? Our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan, now on the frantic final hours of what has been a rather unusual contest.
Mr. Sunak, are you confident you'll be Prime Minister by this evening?
He is close, very close, to becoming the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Rishi Sunak has been picking up support hour by hour, but the Conservative Party is not united. This was the leader of the European Research Group, representing pro-Brexit Tory MPs.
We believe that we have one, and potentially two, extremely strong options to be leader of the Conservative Party, but as a group, we were unable to collectively endorse either candidate.
A short time ago, Rishi Sunak had around 188 declared supporters, more than half the parliamentary party. Penny Mordaunt had just 27 publicly declared supporters, although her team claim she has more than 90. She must have 100 plus to stay in the race beyond 2 o'clock. There is now intense pressure on Mordaunt to step aside, although this morning her backers denied she would quit the race.
We are feeling supremely confident this morning. There's a lot of support for Penny from colleagues. We had that support from all sides of the party yesterday. There is absolutely no chance that Penny will step down.
Boris Johnson's decision to pull out of the leadership contest last night had threatened to throw the race wide open again if his supporters had moved en masse behind Mordaunt. But many of his most high-profile backers, including Simon Clarke, Nadhim Zahawi, James Cleverly and Priti Patel, have in fact rode in behind Sunak. The great unknown is what happens if this gets to the Tory membership. There are a lot of Conservative Party members who have their doubts about Rishi Sunak simply because of what happened with Boris Johnson. What would you say to them?
Well, I'm afraid to say I strongly disagree with the backstabber phrase that got used and thrown about a lot in the summer. I actually thought that during the course of the summer, some members that I met had thought that at the beginning, but I felt that it had ebbed considerably. And I also thought as we went through the hustings and he made his case to them more and more, his popularity grew.
This lunchtime, George Freeman, a senior member of Penny Mordaunt's team, said that given the need for stability and unity, even he was now urging her to back Rishi Sunak instead. Labour say choosing the next Prime Minister shouldn't just be left to the Conservative Party.
Whatever happens today, the public are going to be excluded. And it's not right. We're supposed to live in a democracy. 70% of the public want to have a general election. They can't just keep passing this job amongst themselves and think that it's all right. It's not all right. We should have a general election.
The power to call the next election will soon pass to either Rishi Sunak or perhaps Penny Mordaunt. Either of them will have a lot of work to do to make their party electable again. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, as you'd expect, Robert is here to talk about all this with me.
Yet again.
It's been days, in fact weeks, since we were last dealing with the departure or arrival of a new Prime Minister. Look, fair to tell our viewers, we've been standing here for 3 hours waiting to go live if Penny Mordaunt stepped down or stepped aside. She hasn't. What's the latest?
So she's frantically trying to get her numbers up to the minimum she needs, 100. I mean, just to be clear, I am as confident as I can be that in the course of today, Rishi Sunak will be named as the new leader of the Tory party and, therefore will become our Prime Minister. Probably on Wednesday. I would imagine Liz Truss will go and see King Charles on Wednesday, and that's when the formal handover of power will happen, because although it is theoretically possible that we will learn at 2:00 that Penny Mordaunt has got the minimum number of nominations, 100. She wasn't there only a few minutes ago when I checked, but even if she does creep over that particular line, it will mean, however, that considerably less than a third of Tory MPs are backing her, and she will be under enormous pressure from her colleagues to stand down, because if it goes to a members' contest, there is a risk. She would say that would be a great risk for her, as it were, that she wins the contest. But imagine a leader taking over at this period of tremendous economic instability for the country, knowing that more than 2/3 of her colleagues didn't want her. I don't think the Tory MPs, well, they'll put enormous pressure on her not to do that. So I think she will stand down today.
But she hasn't yet. And, she's been fighting on all morning.
Yeah.
We've heard there are splits in her key advisors.
Yeah.
The ERG, the kind of what we once called the Eurosceptic group, met, split. They couldn't agree on anything. I mean, is it possible she might keep on going despite all the pressure that you say?
Well, there's a theoretical possibility. And look, we've lived through the most extraordinary times where the normal rules of politics don't apply. But look, I know her a little bit. I think she's a sensible person. She's also got a lot of supporters, people like Damien Green, George Freeman, from the sort of traditional centre-left bit of the Tory party. I don't believe they will continue to support her if I think they would. I think if she didn't voluntarily do the right thing, they would just say, "No, awfully sorry, we're no longer with you." And therefore, in this so-called indicative vote of MPs that comes this afternoon, I think she could be possibly humiliated. So, I honestly do think that she will stand down. Now, to be clear, it's completely rational for her to be saying at the moment that she's fighting on, and saying, which she repeatedly says, that she's doing this because she thinks Tory party members must have a say. And she's saying that because she wants to be leader of the Tory party one day. It will be music to the ears of Tory members that she wants to empower them in this contest. But at the end of the day, I think that the pressure from her parliamentary colleagues to curtail this process will win out.
Okay, we should capture a sense of what today means. We've already had history made in the last, week or so, the shortest prime ministerial reign in British history. That's already gone into the history books. If Rishi Sunak does become prime minister today, the first member of an ethnic minority, the first British Asian, these are, big moments for the UK as a country.
Yeah.
But one question that will be foremost tonight is, after all the chaos, can he actually unite the Tory party, do you think? Do you think people will swing in behind him, or are we in for more chaos?
Look, we're in for a combination of some chaos. I mean, it can't be as bad as the last few weeks, surely. There are a lot of Tory MPs who can't stand him, and look, truthfully, although they may keep quiet for a while, as soon as this party hits tough times, they will cut up rough again and criticise. So it would be naive to assume that this very factional, very split party will suddenly become this happy family. And the reason for that is, as I say, that Rishi Sunak inherits the mantle at a time of greatest economic instability in modern times, as bad actually as during the 2007-8 financial crisis. We've got a Chancellor in Jeremy Hunt, who I assume will be kept in the job, though that hasn't been confirmed yet, who is doing something extraordinary, right? Not only has he reversed 43 billion of those tax cuts that Liz Truss promised, but he's now in the process of cutting public spending, putting up other taxes, deeply unpopular stuff, and he's doing it because of the mess that the current occupant, Liz Truss, caused. And so this is all going to be incredibly painful both for the Conservative Party, the government, and for all of us.
One of the things we've obviously discussed a lot on News at 10, we've led News at 10 a couple of times with some of these really distressing cost of living reports in depth, which just show, and many of the people watching this programme, this will be uppermost in their mind. It's not like what's going on in the Tory party. It's how do we get through this week? How do we get through next week? Let alone how are we going to get through this winter? We talked about spending cuts. We've talked about things coming down the track. What is your best guess about Rishi Sunak's kind of attitude to all this? And we've seen the energy bill support has been curtailed recently. What's your best guess you can tell people this lunchtime about if we do go to Rishi Sunak prime ministership, what that's going to mean for them?
Well, what it's going to mean is a continuation of the kind of policies we're seeing from Jeremy Hunt. I mean, Rishi Sunak is the living embodiment of what Liz Truss and her then Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng wanted to dispense with, which is what they called, and they didn't like this, Treasury orthodoxy. And what that means is when you face the kind of financial crisis that we are facing, under Liz Truss, market interest rates soared. It was inevitable that the interest rate controlled by the Bank of England was going to rise more than it would otherwise have done. That meant mortgage rates. I mean, they've hit for 2-year mortgage rates over 6%, completely unaffordable for millions of people. Now, the good news about this return to so-called Treasury orthodoxy, which will be painful, public service cuts, and taxes going up. The good news is market interest rates are coming down. They're probably not going to be as low as they would have been without the Truss crisis, but they are coming down. So very interesting. After Boris Johnson pulled out last night, and because he is one of the world's big spenders, markets did not have confidence that he would do what investors think is the right thing by retrenching. Very interesting this morning that those market interest rates, the price that the government has to borrow, fell by 0.25 percentage point. That's a dramatic drop. And therefore, if you are somebody with debt, mortgage, business with debt, that's good news. It means that what you'll be paying to borrow will be lower than it would otherwise have been.
Okay, Robert, for now, we'll come back to you very shortly, but for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's put some of that to our economics editor, Joel Hills, who is at the Treasury, the orthodoxy Treasury, as we might call it once again. Joel, we've been so governed, haven't we, by the markets in recent weeks. So I guess the first question today is, what are the markets making of all this in the round?
Yeah, Tom, who knew what a bond yield was just 3 weeks ago? It's amazing, really, what's happened. The financial markets, the bond market in particular, brought down Liz Truss's government. As Robert was saying there, the more likely it seems that Rishi Sunak will be the next Prime Minister, and have to obviously decide who inhabits the Treasury here behind me, the stronger the pound gets and the cheaper it becomes for the government to borrow money, and therefore for everyone else in the economy, whether it's households or businesses, to borrow money. And that's, I think, because investors know with Rishi Sunak a little bit at least of what they're going to get, and the assumption that they are making is that the public finances, the nation's books, will be run in a more responsible way. Rishi Sunak made it absolutely clear, both as Chancellor and during the course of his election campaign, about what he stood for. His view was the priority was to get inflation back on a leash, back down towards the Bank of England's target. His job as Chancellor, he saw it, was to make sure that the nation's finances, that borrowing and debt were under control. And he also had a third priority, which was to try and reform the economy in different ways to ensure that growth in the longer term picked up. We are assuming that Rishi Sunak will hold on to those founding principles, and that whoever he chooses as Chancellor, and I happen to agree with Robert, I think Jeremy Hunt is most likely to remain in post, will have to embody those principles too. Go back a few weeks and no one at the Dog and Duck knew or even cared what fiscal rules actually were. turns out they matter very greatly, and how the government's finances are managed is absolutely vitally important, particularly when, like the UK, you depend on investors lending you money.
Okay, Joel, thank you very much indeed, and apologies for the slight sound problems there. Now, look, we mentioned at the start that we've heard an awful lot from MPs, we've heard an awful lot, perhaps not quite so much, we've heard also from Tory members. We haven't heard much from voters. Now, our Midlands reporter, Ellie Pitt, is with some of them in Stratford-upon-Avon, a seat held by former Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi, who has, it's fair to say, I think, flip-flopped over who he was going to support. It was Boris Johnson, and once he'd pulled out, Mr. Zahawi switch to Mr. Sunak. Now, Ellie, are the people there as indecisive as their MP?
Well, Tom, I've spoken to a few Conservative voters and party members this morning, and some have given me a variety of views as to who they'd like to see in charge next. Some of them have supported Boris and say they're disappointed he's dropped out of the race, but others just want a quick conclusion now to this contest. Well, with me here in the cafe are James and Sharon Fisher, who voted Conservative in the past. What do you both make about Penny and Rishi, and who would you like to see take over?
Well, I think at the moment we're both leaning towards Rishi. We both like Penny, but feel that she's perhaps not ready, and feel Rishi is a better choice at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we like her. I think she'll make a good frontline politician, probably in a few years' time. But we're in a mess at the moment. We need someone who has experience in frontline politics. And Rishi, we like him. He did well during the COVID period, and so we're leaning towards him. We'll be quite happy. So Penny later, Rishi today.
What do you make of the fact that we're sort of in this situation and we're looking at another Conservative leadership contest?
Well, it's a mess, isn't it? It has been a mess, but they've got to fix it. It needs somebody of experience to sort the situation out. The economy is looking tanking, and we're really concerned from our personal perspective. We're both retired. My daughter's just about to move into her first home, and we have your
My father's in a care home, so from the social care point of view, we're sort of, concerned on that aspect. So, yes, we're in a bit of a mess at the moment.
So we need a strong leader to fix it. It's going to be some difficult decisions, we know that. I'm fed up with the lies, basically, and trying to bribe us into think positively of the government when really we need common sense and a strong approach.
What do you make of calls for a general election at this stage, given just how many unelected leaders we've had?
Well, I think, that I can imagine the opposition Labour Party wanting an election, but at the end of the day, we've got to see what the manifestos are. So, otherwise, it's a personality competition. What we want to know is what all of the main parties are going to do, and at the moment, Labour, as far as I understand, are well ahead in the polls, but probably because of the failure of the Tories, rather than a positive thing that they've been talking about. So manifesto is going to be important, but it's not available yet.
Sure.
And I feel, if we had a general election sort of now, Conservatives would definitely lose. Let's hope that they can turn it around in 2 years and bring us something positive,
Brilliant. Thank you both very, very much. Well, a range of views from Conservative voters and party members here in Stratford-on-Avon, but one word that has been repeated is the need for stability now.
Ellie, yes, I suspect there'll be many people watching this who'd agree with that. Well, let's go to Rishi Sunak's constituency. Kelly Foran is in Richmond in North Yorkshire. Kelly, what are people making of how things are shaping up with you?
Well, despite the fact that we're more than 200 miles from London, from where Rishi Sunak is today and arguably spends much of his time, it is here, this small market town in North Yorkshire, where he is a Member of Parliament, and he has been since 2015. And it has to be said, throughout this morning, the people that we've been talking to here, most of them have had dealings with him, have a story to tell about him. And although their confidence in where this country is going in general doesn't exactly seem to be at an all-time high, their confidence in having their MP as the next Prime Minister, well, for that, there seems to be a lot of support.
Lovely man, really easy to talk to, and I think he knows what he's talking about.
I do think that Richie will do a good job.
Can't do any worse, let's put it that way.
I'm so pleased that he's in contention now, so yeah, great man for the North East.
The people that we've been speaking to, many of them say he's been in their children's school, he's supported the businesses around here, and one man actually gave me a copy of a certificate that Rishi Sunak gave to him during the pandemic to thank him for working throughout the pandemic, saying, "Your kindness makes our part of North Yorkshire such a special place to be." And as we've been stood here, people are approaching us and asking us, is he the next Prime Minister yet? So that is the feeling of how this afternoon is going to play out amongst his constituents here.
OK, Kelly, thank you very much indeed. Well, Ian Woods is in Penny Mordaunt's constituency in Portsmouth. Penny Mordaunt has held the Portsmouth North seat since 2010. Ian, what are people saying with you?
And actually, Penny Mordaunt's connection to the constituency goes back a little earlier to 2005 when she first stood as a candidate in this constituency. She lost on that occasion, but has since turned a Labour seat into a pretty solidly Tory one, with a majority of the last election of more than 15,000, which suggests an ability to persuade people of her point of view and to back her. But that doesn't mean that the people of Portsmouth North are all backing her leadership bid.
Been such a upheaval in the last 6 weeks, hasn't it? So nobody knows whether we're coming or going at the moment. So yeah, it'd be handy if she got in, I think.
If she hasn't got much over 100, I think she should probably drop out, simply because having another leadership election of party members is not going to be a terribly good idea.
She couldn't be much worse than anybody else we've had over the last 44 days, is it? Was it 44 days? I don't think she's got much of a chance, though.
Should bring back Boris. I think he did a really good job through COVID, and everyone picked on him and started on him, but he did such a good job. So I think it can't be any worse than this Liz Truss.
I have to say, I don't sense quite the same anticipation levels as we heard from Richmond, Rishi Sunak's constituency a short time ago, or indeed where you are in Westminster. People are interested, but they don't necessarily think that Penny Mordaunt stands much of a chance of success, so therefore they're not really banking on it. Having said that, there is a barbershop just down the road called A Close Shave. Well, let's see in the next few minutes whether indeed it is a close shave or whether it's an overwhelming victory for Rishi Sunak.
OK, Ian, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go to Glasgow now and join our Scotland reporter, Louise Scott, in Glasgow. Louise, obviously, relations famously strained between Liz Truss in her brief premiership and Nicola Sturgeon. But what's the feeling in Scotland as we approach this decision point?
Well, the First Minister, she isn't a fan of either Prime Ministerial candidate. In fact, she's saying the Conservatives have unleashed chaos on the UK, describing it as a democratic outrage that there'll be a new Prime Minister without a general election. Scottish Conservative MPs, they reject that call. The 6 of them that stand north of the border, they believe there needs a period of time for stability and certainty, which they say the new Prime Minister will bring. Well, the Scottish Government was due to reveal its fiscal position to MSPs this week following Westminster's mini-budget, but it now looks like that will be delayed as they wait to hear what the new Chancellor's plans are. The full Scottish Government budget is due for the 15th of December. Well, here's what the First Minister had to say this morning to do with that.
If Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister today or later in the week, as I suspect he will, what we know is that next Monday his Chancellor is going to stand up in the House of Commons and unveil a round of cuts that the Scottish Government and public services are going to be powerless to withstand. There needs to be a general election because the Tories have no mandate, not just for the personality who walk into number 10 this week, but for the policies.
Well, the Secretary of State for Scotland role has been held by Alistair Jack, who has backed Boris Johnson along the way. Liz Truss kept him in that role, but that could all change if Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister. David Mundell and Andrew Bowie, MPs in Scotland, have both backed him. And that role is crucial when it comes to the upcoming Supreme Court ruling on a second independence referendum.
OK, Louise, thank you very much. Well, let's move on from Scotland to Wales and Cardiff, and our Wales reporter, Rhys Williams. Rhys, one of the most memorable soundbites the last week or 10 days actually was Mark Drakeford, the Welsh First Minister, apoplectic with rage about the whole question of the mini budget and the catastrophic economic consequences that followed. So what's the mood there this morning, and who are the Welsh Conservative MPs backing?
Yes, it really was, wasn't it? Many of the Conservative MSs here in the Senedd feeling that the First Minister was deflecting from questions over ambulance waiting times here in Wales, although certainly there have been tensions high. In terms of Welsh Conservative MPs, all eyes this morning were on Sir Robert Buckland, the Secretary of State for Wales. You may remember, Tom, that in the previous leadership election, he initially backed Rishi Sunak before U-turning and defecting to Liz Truss. This morning, though, he announced that he would be supporting Rishi Sunak, and he hasn't got much time to make a U-turn this time. Although it is a mixed picture across Wales, though, with other MPs. For example, Sarah Atherton in Wrexham. She yesterday announced her support for Boris Johnson and hasn't said yet which way she will go. In terms of other former Secretaries of State for Wales, for example, Stephen Crabb and Simon Hart, both of them have publicly said that they will be supporting Rishi Sunak. In terms of the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, we've heard no comment from him this morning, nothing since last week when he reiterated those wider Labour calls for a general election.
OK, Rhys, thank you very much indeed. Well, finally, let's go to Belfast and our reporter, Jordan Motes. Jordan, you know, the issues around Northern Ireland, the protocol and so on have been so much at the forefront of our politics. Do you get a clear sense of how the different candidates are likely to approach this?
Yes, well, very few Prime Ministers come to office without Northern Ireland featuring quite heavily in their intro, and whoever takes over this week, it will be no different for them. Brexit and the protocol are the big issues here that will really factor into everything else. There's no government here in Northern Ireland. That's because the DUP walked out of the executive back in February in protest over the protocol and are refusing to go back in until it is sorted. Now, under Liz Truss's government, there were some discussions with the EU and they seem to be going fairly positively, and there's also in the background that legislation going through Parliament that would override the protocol. The DUP doesn't really care which avenue it takes as long as the outcome is the same. And this all factors into a second, rather more pressing issue for whoever takes up office in Downing Street. If there's no government here in Northern Ireland by the end of the week, the law says there must be an election. Now, the current Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has insisted he will call an election if there is no government in place, and that seems to be the likely outcome by the end of this week. But there is a question mark over whether or not Chris Heaton-Harris will even be in office by the end of this week, and whatever his successor will do next. A short time ago, Sinn Féin said that they hope the protocol issue is resolved quickly, and no doubt the DUP will be watching very closely at whoever's in Downing Street to see what happens in the next coming days.
OK, Jordan, thank you very much indeed. And we will have rolling coverage. We do have rolling coverage of the race to become Prime Minister on our website. That is at itv.com/news. And we have the latest as it breaks on our social media channels too. Search for ITV News and you will find them. Good moment to come back to Robert here, who is still getting news thick and fast on his phone. What is the latest as you write?
So I'm told Penny Mordaunt doesn't have the 100 nominations. So in a few minutes, Sunak will be confirmed as the new Tory leader, which is quite a big deal if my source is correct, to be perfectly frank.
So how far short do we think she was, or you still not sure?
I don't know the actual number, but I'm told, she was struggling all morning. Quite a few of her colleagues were increasingly anxious at the prospect of the contest going to members, They only really wanted it to go to members if she was, significantly above the 100. And so I think it's altogether possible that in the course of the morning, those of her supporters who really felt that it would be destabilising for the Tory party to have a contest unless she had over a third of MPs supporting her, I think they may have backed away. So, I'm afraid it looks as though, afraid from her point of view, that it looks as though it will all be over in just a few minutes when we go to the House of Commons and we hear Sir Graham Brady, the sort of shop steward of Tory MPs, announce what the nominations are. And just to be clear, my understanding is the only candidate who has gone above the threshold of 100, and he'll have gone massively above it, is Rishi Sunak, which means that today we will know that he's the new leader of the Tory party, and in a day or so he will be our new Prime Minister.
Lots to reflect on there, and let's come to that in a moment. But just can we deal with Penny Mordaunt first?
Yeah.
I mean, I assume she has a big job. Is she on the phone to Rishi Sunak right now saying, make me Foreign Secretary, make me... I mean, how does it work in these final minutes, do you think?
So she's emerged actually in the last couple of months since Boris Johnson resigned as one of the bigger figures in the Tory party. She's plainly got support among MPs and growing support among members. I slightly assume that Rishi Sunak will give her a proper job in his government because, one of the imperatives for Rishi Sunak is to hold his warring party together, and that means giving jobs not only to talented people, but to those who are talented who might also not share all his views. He's going to have to grit his teeth and put together a cabinet that's a proper coalition of the different strands of thought within his party. And, in that coalition, there will have to be a place for Penny Mordaunt.
Obviously, while you're speaking, you can't look at your phone, neither can I, but I've just been told from the gallery that she has in fact pulled out. It's on her Twitter feed, and that is it. So let's just capture, this is a big moment in history. Said we've had the shortest Prime Minister in British history. We've now got history made again today at the second time of asking. He stood last time, he didn't make it. He does now look to be the next Prime Minister of this country, and that is a big moment. We should be clear about that.
It's an enormous moment, and I mean, let's put it also into the context of recent history. I mean, he was among MPs the front runner when Boris Johnson stood down. He spent all summer saying that Liz Truss's plans to cut taxes would be a catastrophe for the British people, for the British economy, that they would ultimately make us poorer. Tory members nonetheless rejected him and backed Liz Truss. She put in place those tax cuts. They have been a catastrophe. And now Tory MPs have chosen Rishi Sunak as their new leader, as the next Prime Minister, and it won't go to Tory members. And I think some Tory MPs would say thank goodness for that, because they made such a catastrophic mistake last time.
Does that cause him a problem, though, in terms of his party, that he doesn't have that? I mean, we've argued about the kind of democratic business of this. We live in a parliamentary democracy. People vote for their MPs. They give them sovereignty and all the rest of it. But in terms of his own personal support within the party, does that matter, do you think, or not particularly?
Look, he's got two big legitimacy issues. One will be that under the Tory party's rules, as you say, the procedure is that the ultimate decision is made by Tory members. And, it's quite clear. And if you just look actually at the kind of websites which, where Tory members gather, lots of them don't love Rishi Sunak, even though he was completely right over the summer. And so, when it comes to getting, members out to campaign, it may be more difficult for him because, they haven't had a say on his choice. It's not a completely trivial issue that there's no members' vote. But much more important, frankly, in the short term, is dealing with the exploding deficit, the real problem in the public finances, and therefore getting on with the job with a parliamentary party that wants him is definitely the imperative for him. The second legitimacy issue, though, which is an important one, is this is the third Prime Minister that we've had since the last general election. Now, we do live in a parliamentary system. It is not a presidential system, just very briefly, and therefore it's allowed.
Good afternoon. As returning officer in the leadership election, I can confirm that we have received one valid nomination. And Rishi Sunak is therefore elected as leader of the Conservative Party. And you may wish to know the new leader of the party will address us in this room at 2:30. Thank you.
Well, there we have it. A very, very short moment of drama after all the drama that we've had. Sir Graham Brady, the chair of the executive of the 1922 committee, that is the committee of Tory backbenchers, as Robert was saying, effectively the shop steward, making the announcement there that after weeks and weeks of pretty big political drama, let's be honest, a new Prime Minister. Robert and I were standing here in the pouring rain, what feels like only 5 minutes ago, when Liz Truss arrived in Westminster. She had this radical plan. Yeah. As Robert was just saying, you know, Rishi Sunak lost. Rarely has a loser been proved right so quickly in British history, really on the big question. And yet here he is now about to become Prime Minister. I mean, that's one thing he's got massively in his favour, doesn't he? He's got lots of problems, as we said, no endorsement from party members, much bigger problem really in the long run and in terms of our viewers from the general, from the electorate as a whole. Huge problems to address on the economy, on the public finance, but the whole country's watched him lose an election after making an argument and then being proved spectacularly right.
So I think, you know, whether it's people in his party or people at home, they will certainly want Sunak, or anybody who happened to be in there now, to try and sort out this financial crisis, which was putting up interest rates and, you know, essentially turning what is almost certainly already recession for the UK into something much worse. But make no mistake, you know, not only is there that huge economic challenge, there is also just a massive political challenge for Rishi Sunak, because every opposition party will say there is no precedent for there to be a third Prime Minister since a general election, and they will say he is not legitimate. And day after day after day, particularly, you know, frankly, when this government will run into troubles, which it will do because of the economic crisis, they will say day after day after day, the British people have to have a say, there must be a general election. And that pressure is not going to go away. I mean, as we discussed, he doesn't have to give in to that pressure. He's got a majority in Parliament of, he's got a proper majority. Okay, yeah. And so long as Tory MPs don't desert him, then he can govern for another 2 years. But there are almost certainly going to be issues coming up for him where he'll have to make decisions which will alienate members of his own party. So the fact that he's got a clear majority doesn't mean he can be 100% confident of being able to serve out those 2 years.
We've talked about his biggest strengths going in through that door, you know, as we said, spectacularly being proved right on an economic argument, but quite big weaknesses too, not least the whole question of his, you know, wife's tax non-dom status, not the easiest thing to have, in the background as we go into a cost of living crisis. Yeah. Is that still an issue? I mean, like, you know, we've still got non-dom tax status, a sort of legacy of our colonial years that a lot of people here at Westminster struggle to make sense of. I mean, is that an ongoing issue, do you think?
So she is saying that she is now paying tax in the UK, but she hasn't given up her status. She's just doing it as we all understood it on a voluntary basis. But she is paying tax here. The opposition will continue, I'm sure, to try and make political capital out of her erstwhile position of not paying all the tax that some would say she should have paid here. There's also the other point that until comparatively recently, he almost had non-resident status here because he had a green card, which is, you know, one step away from being a resident of the United States, or being a citizen, sorry, not a resident, a citizen of the United States. And he gave that up very late in his time as Chancellor, Whereas most would have said the moment he became an MP, he should have given it up. So those sorts of issues will come back to haunt him. There's no question. But he's got a massive endorsement today from his parliamentary colleagues, and he's got a very big job on.
Can we just, wheel back to, in a way, the kind of moment of history? It is quite something, especially when you consider our imperial past and everything else. Some people might have argued it should have happened sooner, but here we are. It is a big day in the sense that, the first British Asian, the first member of an ethnic minority is going to be Prime Minister. I'm in behind America, of course, because Barack Obama beat us to it on that front. But, that is going to be a big moment for us as a nation, right?
Gosh, I mean, for all, the concerns that millions of people have about widening social and economic inequalities in this country, it is a remarkable moment that a British Indian on Diwali, it is Diwali today, and he will be celebrating it, and it's an enormously important festival for the Hindu community. On that day, he is now leader of the Tory party and will be our Prime Minister. That is, an enormous event. I mean, I should just point out, as a Jew, some would say that Disraeli was an ethnic minority, because being a Jew isn't just about faith, it's also to an extent about ethnicity. So some would say he's the second member of an ethnic minority. But nonetheless, that was a long time ago.
More than a century ago.
That was a long time ago. And I mean, to use the phrase, the other point about him is he is the first person of colour, to use that expression, to be Prime Minister. And that, some would say that shows a really modern Britain. I mean, many would say that is just, a cause for tremendous celebration.
Okay, to be discussed later. Our UK editor, Paul Brand, is over at Westminster. Paul, we've talked a lot about the big issues, but can you talk us through a little bit more about Rishi Sunak's policy platform, if you like, in a wider context?
Yeah, hi Tom, I can, and let's bring in a Conservative MP who's backed Rishi Sunak in order to do that. I think that's probably the best way of exploring some of the issues that Rishi Sunak's going to face, and I'm pleased to be joined here by Mark Harper, the MP for Forest of Dean. Thanks so much for joining me. So firstly, what kind of Prime Minister will Rishi Sunak be?
Well, I think you can see that from how he conducted the leadership election, and in his statement yesterday, he's going to be totally focused on the public interest and the national interest and governing for the public, and that's why he wants to appoint a broad-based government that draws on all the talents in the Conservative Party so that we can all work as a united team focused on delivering for people at home. And obviously the first thing that he needs to focus on is dealing with the economic challenge that the country faces. But he also, very importantly in that statement, talked about a government that's at the heart of it's got integrity and professionalism. And as he said during the summer, he wants to be a Prime Minister that we can all be proud of. And I'm absolutely convinced that's what he'll be.
You mentioned the economic crisis there, and there's no doubt that he has experience, of course, in the Treasury. He worked in the city before that. He knows his numbers. But does he have the relatability? Has he walked those steps of people facing the cost of living crisis when it's repeatedly pointed out that he is a millionaire himself?
He is now, but as he said during the time, he comes from an ordinary family, in Southampton. His mum was a pharmacist, his dad was an NHS GP. Yes, he's been successful in his own career, and yes, his wife's father built a successful business from the bottom up, which employs thousands of people in Britain. Both of those things are things that Conservatives want to have more people have the chance to do. We're an aspirational party. We want everyone to be successful. And the important thing is what you do with your success. And he's chosen to go into public service, to go into politics, to serve his country. And that's what he's going to do. And I think you saw during the leadership election, he does connect with people. And I think the most important thing was when he was Chancellor. And we had the lockdown and we had the furlough scheme. And I think in that press conference when he spoke to the country, he didn't just talk pounds and pence and the nuts and bolts of it. He talked about the values that underpin the government, and that's what I think he'll do as Prime Minister.
So he might have the economic clout, and certainly your colleagues think so. What about the international clout? Because he's going to have to go now and perform on a world stage, stand up to Vladimir Putin. Some of your colleagues have been raising with me in the past couple of days the fact that Rishi Sunak hasn't promised to spend 3% of GDP, for example, on defence. Has he got that same international standing that certainly Boris Johnson had, and arguably Liz Truss had in terms of her foreign experience?
Yes, I think he has. When he becomes Prime Minister in the next few hours, then he will be leader of our country. He will be head of a G7 country and the second largest NATO power. He was clear during the summer, our support, for example, for Ukraine remains absolute and resolute. He was clear about that. He's been clear about that with the Ukrainians, and he'll continue doing that. And in fact, he said during defence he will spend what is required to keep our country safe. And he'll do that based on the threats that we face now and in the future. And I'm very confident that that's exactly what he'll do.
How's he going to be able to talk around some of his most hardened critics? Because although we've seen a huge number of MPs support him, there are a few dozen left who still feel very bitter about the row between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson that ultimately led Rishi Sunak to resign from his government. How is he going to heal that divide?
Well, look, I think you're right to raise that, but I would say two things. First of all, I was very encouraged by the support that we saw both over the weekend and today from people across the party, including those that had been Boris Johnson supporters. It was good, I think, that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak had the chance for a positive and constructive meeting over the weekend. And I also think that the words that Rishi said about Boris Johnson after he pulled out of the contest were very positive
But then you've got
about
people
his
like
return
Nadine
to public
Dorries, for example,
service.
saying let's have an election. Rishi Sunak's got no mandate.
Well, I don't, just on a factual point, I don't think that's right. I mean, we stood on a clear manifesto in 2019. That's what the voters wanted us to deliver. And Rishi Sunak was clear in his statement yesterday. That is the basis on which this government will deliver. You know, Prime Ministers hold power by being able to command the confidence of a majority of MPs in the House of Commons, and I'm confident Rishi Sunak will do so. And I think the best way of bringing people together is to govern competently, compassionately, and that's exactly what he'll do.
And presumably have a cabinet of all the talents, as the phrase goes. Are you happy to see people in the cabinet that you bitterly disagree with?
Look, he's going to draw people into the cabinet based on competence and representing all of the different strands of opinion there are in the Conservative Party. I happen to think teams of diverse people, particularly of diverse opinions, are stronger. The ability to disagree, thrash things out in private, come to an agreement and then stick together in public, I think is what will ultimately make us successful. And I'm sure that's what all of my colleagues, both those that end up in government and those on the backbenches, will want to do.
Presumably there'll have to be a fairly big role in there for Penny Mordaunt.
Look, Penny is a very talented person, so I would want to see her with a significant role in government, but those are not matters for me. Those are matters for our new Prime Minister, and he's been very clear during the campaign. He hasn't been promising jobs to people. He'll appoint people based on talent, on capability, and getting the right people in the right jobs to serve the public.
All right, Mark Harper, thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. So Mark Harper's been a big supporter of Rishi Sunak all the way through this contest, and we've seen today more than 200 MPs, something like that, in the end came out to support him. But as we were picking up on there, he's going to have to now look at the far more difficult task of putting his government together, drawing on all wings of the party, if he wants that backing, if he wants that assurity that he's going to serve as Prime Minister in a way that isn't disruptive and destructive to the party.
OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed. Well, our political correspondent, Romilly, is in the Houses of Parliament, where I believe she's joined by the Foreign Secretary, Mr Cleverly. But for how much longer? Romilly, over to you on that.
Well, let's find out. It was pretty clear through the morning that this wasn't a race that Penny Mordaunt wanted to pull out of, but a lot of Boris Johnson's supporters through the morning started moving over to Rishi Sunak. Among them, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly. Mr Cleverly, what's your view of this result, a coronation for Rishi Sunak?
Well, look, a Prime Minister needs to be able to enjoy the confidence of the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Rishi showed over the last couple of days he was getting that overwhelming support, and I don't think anybody in the country, or indeed here in Parliament, really wants another week of process drawn out when the result is so clear and compelling. So I'm very, very pleased that we are now able to refocus exclusively on delivering good government for the British people. That's what we're here to do. That's what we want to do.
It's not the result that you wanted. You thought that Mr Johnson would be a better candidate, a man who's facing a parliamentary investigation, a man who has a very different economic outlook to Mr Sunak.
Yeah, but he's not standing.
Why did you think he would be a better candidate?
Well, I mean, I've been a long-standing friend and colleague of Boris from the time when he was Mayor of London. I've supported him through the time he was Prime Minister, but he's not standing. And the point is, what we now need to do is, rather than relitigate arguments of the past, what we now need to do is focus relentlessly on delivering good government for the British people. There are so many things going on in the world, the stuff that I'm doing every day in the Foreign Office. I was in Parliament late last night talking to my French and American counterparts. We have now got to focus exclusively on good government. And the only way we do that is to support the Prime Minister.
Mr Sunak, we understand, will be addressing the parliamentary party this afternoon. What do you want to hear from him?
Well, I think what I want to hear is what everyone wants to hear: a plan for government, a plan to ensure that the parliamentary party focuses exclusively on that we don't refight the arguments of the past, because the British people need and deserve to see us relentlessly focused on them. These incredibly difficult times, we don't have the luxury of division or argument. We have got work to do.
You've indulged quite a lot as a party in that division and argument over the past few weeks. Do you regret that?
Well, I've had more than a lifetime's worth of political intrigue. What we now need to do is we need to be professional, we need to be focused, and I think if we do that, we will be rewarded in the minds of the British people. But it's up to us, and I have no doubt that Rishi, when he is asked to become Prime Minister, will focus exclusively on that.
As recently as this morning, disappointed Boris Johnson supporter Sir Christopher Chope was arguing that this should now go to a general election because the party is so riven.
Look, I don't think anybody wants now another couple of months or weeks of delay as we fight a general election. People want to know that we are dealing with a financial uncertainty around the globe that is affecting us here in the UK. People want to know that we continue to support the Ukrainians in defence of their country. People want to know that we're still working to prevent Iran developing a nuclear weapon, and all the other things going on both domestically and internationally. And a 6-week pause to fight a general election would not be conducive to any of that. What we do need to do is support the Prime Minister, get on with the job and look after the British people.
One of Mr Sunak's first tasks now is going to be forming his new cabinet. Do you expect Mr Hunt to stay as Chancellor? Do you expect yourself to stay as Foreign Secretary?
So, government formation is a job for the Prime Minister. He has not yet even been asked by His Majesty the King to form a government, but he will do soon. My message is completely clear to everybody. We now have to support the Prime Minister. We now have to deliver good government in whatever capacity we serve. Of course, Foreign Secretary is a fantastic job, but the point is, in whatever capacity, we now have to deliver good government on behalf of the British people.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much. That is a message that you're going to hear a lot from Conservative MPs now, that it is time to unite, time to get behind Rishi Sunak as their new leader. Whether that's possible, we'll see.
OK, Romilly, well, let's have another look at the historic occasion in the Houses of Parliament a short while ago when Sir Graham Brady, leader of the 1922 committee, announced who would be our next Prime Minister.
As returning officer in the leadership election, I can confirm that we have received one valid nomination. And Rishi Sunak is therefore elected as leader of the Conservative.
Well, it was short, it was to the point, it was historic, it had its own drama, I guess you could say. Could we just talk about Boris Johnson? Obviously, Romilly talking at length to James cleverly about various things there, but including his support for Boris Johnson. I mean, it's been the most fascinating kind of 2 or 3 days, hasn't it, with Boris Johnson coming back from holiday, coming back from the wilderness, or trying to. I mean, what's your reflection on all that now it's over?
So my reflection is that, he is one of the most remarkable figures in British politics for many, many years. And one manifestation of that is he simply doesn't seem to know, either when he's made a very serious mistake or, when he's beaten. If you remember, it was only in July that more than 60 members of his own government resigned because they felt he was unfit to continue as Prime Minister. He was in the wilderness for just a few weeks on the back benches, but he decided somehow that he would be, the great redeemer for the Tory party, and he stood. But what became clear very quickly is that even if he did win because of his popularity among Tory members, and he does still remain popular among Tory members, it would be almost impossible for him to form a functioning government, because Tory MPs definitely overwhelmingly didn't want him back, and he would have struggled to actually find a significant number of talented people to work with him in there. So in the end, he had to pull out last night. He literally had no other choice. I think he's probably been rather damaged by the process, and it's not clear to me that the reputation of the Tory party has been enhanced by it.
But the thing that I think some people will find hard to understand, James Cleverly, Foreign Secretary, backed him. Nadeem Zahawi backed him. Now, Nadeem Zahawi, as we referred to earlier, called for the Prime Minister to resign, then became his Chancellor for about minutes, then called for him to resign again. Was one of those who precipitated his departure with mass resignations from the government. Now he was supporting him again only a relatively short matter of a few months later. I think people found that gave us all whiplash, did it not?
Certainly the way that Nadeem Zahawi sort of jogs back and forth between, in terms of who he's supporting is I think something that makes a few people dizzy. But the more, I think, sort of fundamental point that you're really getting to is quite how Boris Johnson divides people. It is striking that there are significant numbers of serious people who love him, worship him, think he's amazing.
And quite a lot of, Tory party members and presumably quite a lot of voters still.
But also very, very large numbers of people who also cannot stand him, don't trust him, think he's dishonest. He is, a bit like, I think in many ways the parallels with Trump are overdone, except in one respect, which is people either love him or think he's terrible, just like Trump.
Yeah, I suppose one thing he is a Democrat, and the Trump's sort of reflection on the election and claiming it's stolen and everything is a whole different thing altogether. So I guess one's right to make that distinction. Just on Liz Truss, can we just reflect on her for a moment? The shortest prime ministership in British history, and we were just talking now about who was worse. Was Eden worse? Was the Earl of Bute worse? She's got a real claim to be the worst Prime Minister in 300 years, has she not?
Okay, well, one doesn't sort of want to rub salt into what must still be very open wounds for her. But yeah, her time in Downing Street has been catastrophic for the country, catastrophic for her party, catastrophic for her. As we've discussed in recent days, her mini-budget was an extraordinary, unforced error, self-harm, and we are, as a result of it, going to be poorer, whatever, if Jeremy Hunt remains as Chancellor, whatever Rishi Sunak does to mend the problem. There will be permanent damage to the public finances and therefore the resources of public services. And that is laid at her door, and indeed the door of her Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. And the reason it is wholly their responsibility is they sacked, when they took office, the kind of people who would have said to them, don't do that. They sacked the permanent Secretary of the Treasury, and they said to the Office of Budget Responsibility, who would have told them this was the wrong thing to do, that they didn't want their advice. And unfortunately, therefore, all this mess is theirs. Now, she will go, I understand, probably on Wednesday after Prime Minister's questions. It can be very odd to see her do that, last Prime Minister's questions. And that'll be 50 days in office. But it is 50 days in which a lot of damage has been done to her party and to the country.
Okay. Robert, we'll come back to you in a minute, but thank you very much for now. Well, let's go to our economics editor, Joel Hills, who is at the Bank of England. Joel, big morning, as we've saying, historic morning. I know we've had a few of those in recent years. You know, not long ago we were welcoming a new Prime Minister with a totally radically different economic plan. As Robert's been saying, a return to Treasury orthodoxy, but still enormous economic problems ahead, as you've reminded us of many times in the past weeks. What is the reaction of the markets, and what do you make of today's decision?
Well, look, what you've seen in terms of the market reaction is that as it has become clearer and clearer that Rishi Sunak was going to be coronated, so to speak, the pound strengthened in value, and you saw the effective interest rate that the UK government is charged to borrow money fall. And what that reflects is, I suppose, the fact that investors know what Rishi Sunak stands for. He set out his priorities very clearly in obviously his leadership campaign, but even before that when he was Chancellor. It is to get inflation back under control, back down towards 2%, to stabilise the public finances, and to pursue a whole series of what economists will call supply side reforms to improve growth going forward. The big decisions that get called now are absolutely vital, because Rishi Sunak walked straight into a hurricane as Prime Minister. As the Office of Budget Responsibility will set out probably this time next week, things look really grim. Inflation is high, it's rampant, interest rates are rising, and we've seen economic growth evaporate almost altogether, and all the signs are that the UK is probably in some sort of recession. If Rishi Sunak is committed to the fiscal rules set out in the the Conservative Party manifesto that got the party into power in 2019, specifically that debt by the end of the Parliament will be falling as a share of national income, then somehow he and his Chancellor, currently Jeremy Hunt, not confirmed yet though, will have to find something in the order of 30 to 40 billion pounds of either public spending cuts or extra revenues from somewhere. That is an extraordinarily difficult task, particularly when we live in straitened times. It's possible that they'll relook at and rethink the public spending commitments that have already been made in terms of the next 3 years. They were supposed to be quite generous. We were seeing public spending rising. Inflation has torn into those budgets. It may well be that they decide they want to rethink how much money they spend on public services. And we already know, because Jeremy Hunt's already made very, very clear, particularly if he remains as Chancellor, he's committed to spelling out how they'll manage the public finances and fill this hole a week today. And it is expected to include some pretty steep tax rises too. So Rishi Sunak will be aware that he has this enormous challenge in terms of managing the public finances, restoring credibility on the financial markets, and in the background there will be the silent drumbeat of the markets, because it was the markets, the bond market specifically, that brought Liz Truss's government down, and that bond market could roar again at the first sign of fiscal incontinence.
Okay, Joel, you're talking there about a fiscal black hole, 30, 40 billion or whatever it is. Now, for everyone watching this program, I guess they're going to think today, okay, well, it's great to see Rishi Sunak walking in there or not, depending on their politics. But how's it going to affect me? How's it going to affect all of us? Do you have any sense about if we're going to have tax rises? What are the perhaps obvious levers, or the levers you think the Chancellor might pull? If we're going to have spending cuts, is there anywhere sort of likely you think he will go, assuming it remains Jeremy Hunt, or is it just too hard to read it at this point?
Well, there are no easy hits here, Tom. I mean, that much is absolutely clear. On the tax side, I suppose the obvious question is, what will Rishi Sunak do about the national insurance hike that came into effect in April, which Liz Truss reversed? He may decide to reinstate it. He may equally decide that raising income tax, is a better way of effectively raising money in a fairer way. He'll be mindful, of course, that by raising taxes, he's increasing the pain and the pressure on household finances at a time when people are already having to tighten belts. And on the public spending side of things, we saw the settlement in the last budget at the tail end of last year. It was intended to be generous. It was intended to bring an end to austerity. that whole series of spending round commitments were made on the understanding that inflation would come in at around 4.5%. Inflation is more than twice that level now, and there's, for the next 12 months, look like it will remain well above that. So you've got a situation here where the government ideally is in a position where it cuts back on spending, but where you've got public services, whether they're schools, who have got to somehow find the money they need to pay, to fund the increase in pay for their teachers, or the NHS with colossal waiting lists. Where's that money going to come from?
OK, Joel, thank you very much. And Joel, as you will, the more eagle-eyed of you will have spotted, was in fact outside the Treasury, not the Bank of England. So sorry for that slightly misleading intro. But let's go to Rishi Sunak's constituency. Kelly Foran is in Richmond in North Yorkshire. Kelly, what's been the reaction there?
Well, yeah, as you say, this is his constituency. He's been an MP here since 2015. And when that announcement was made, half an hour ago, you could actually hear people in the street shouting, "Is Sunak in? Is Sunak in?" Now, when I asked people earlier today what he was like as their MP, lots of support. He seems very popular. Lots of people talking about personal experiences that they have with him. When I asked in the last few minutes, though, is he the right man to lead this country going forward? Well, it has to be said, there was a little bit more apprehension around that question.
I think it's good. I hope he does well. Yes, I really hope he does well.
He's done an awful lot for the local area since he's been up here. He's always in the papers doing this and that and what have you. So he's a good lad, but let's just hope he can cope with the major role. Let's put it that way.
He's a money man, and I think he knows what he's doing in that department, and I don't think he can do any worse. Now, whether he'll be able to do enough in the time that before they probably yank him out, I think he'll be okay.
The only surprise was that he wasn't the first choice for them.
And although what's happening where you are is more than 200 miles away from here, from his constituents, it has to be said it is very much the talk of this small town here today.
OK, Kelly, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go back to Glasgow and join our Scotland reporter, Louise Scott. Louise, look, big questions for Scotland. Obviously, Nicola Sturgeon says not only does she want to have, but she's going to have another referendum. Of course, we haven't yet had the Supreme Court's ruling on that. But big political questions for the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and the Scottish First Minister to work out.
That's right. I mean, the last time that Rishi Sunak was asked about independence was during the Perth hustings in August. And when he's asked about allowing a second independence referendum, he said, "I can't imagine the circumstances in which I would," adding he believes in the UK and doesn't believe now or any time in the near future is remotely the time to focus on this. But of course, there are just 6 Conservative MPs north of the border. They are all celebrating Rishi Sunak's succession, saying it's now a time for stability and certainty and not a time for a general election, whereas the SNP, well, they want a general election. Their Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, has said they cannot be allowed to impose a third Prime Minister without a general election. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, calling it a democratic outrage. And the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sawar, has said changing the Prime Minister will not stop the rot as the party. They're also call for a general election. One also interesting role to keep an eye on is the Secretary of State for Scotland. It has been held by Alistair Jack, who was a Boris Johnson supporter, but there is David Mundell and Andrew Bowie who have backed Rishi Sunak, who may step into that position, and that's a crucial role when it comes to the upcoming Supreme Court ruling on a second independence referendum.
OK, Louise, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's move on to Cardiff and our Wales reporter, Rhys Williams. Rhys, a lot of talk about a general election. Of course, politicians, opposition politicians, you'd expect to call for an election at this point. They have indeed done so, and there's obviously many people watching this programme who may indeed want an election. It's hard to know whether that's really the kind of the popular will. Do people actually really want to go through an election now, or would they rather just have someone who's sorting out the economic crisis? What's your own impression of how people are feeling in various different parts of Wales about that?
Yeah, I think speaking with some people here in Cardiff Bay this morning and over the last few weeks, the immediate impression that you get is that at the moment people just want stability, and perhaps a general election isn't on top of their minds right now, although there are lots of people calling for it, of course, not namely the First Minister. And I think what a lot of people here in Wales want as well is perhaps a more fruitful working relationship between Cardiff Bay and Westminster. The relationship between the First Minister and Liz Truss was essentially non-existent. They never even spoke with each other while she was Prime Minister. And Boris Johnson and Mark Drakeford had a very difficult relationship. You may remember a leaked recording of Mr Drakeford in which he called Boris Johnson an awful man. You go back to some years prior, for example, David Cameron and Carwyn Jones. They certainly weren't ideological bedfellows or ideological friends, but they had a fairly cordial and professional working relationship. So the impression that you get here is people want a return to maybe some form of working together to sort out the current troubles facing the government.
OK, Rhys, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go to Belfast and our reporter Jordan Motes, we were speaking to a little while ago. Jordan, you probably heard Rhys there talking about how a lot of people in Wales, certainly in Cardiff, want a sort of more cordial, professional relationship with the government in London. Now, obviously, that's of even bigger import, arguably, in Northern Ireland, in that it has so many complex political questions tied up in that. But what's your own view of Rishi Sunak and his attitudes to the really crucial questions like the protocol you were talking about earlier?
Yes, well, during that contest over the summer, Rishi Sunak pledged to fix the Northern Ireland protocol. It has to be said, though, during that contest, he was probably the least favourite candidate out of those who were most opposed to the protocol. And during his time as Chancellor, Rishi Sunak had urged a more cautious approach to those dealings with the EU. But here we are, he's now heading to Downing Street, so this is now very much his problem to deal with and to sort out, and to try and avoid an election of some sort to the Assembly at the end of this week if the DUP continue to refuse to go into government. Earlier we heard from Sinn Féin. They say the new Prime Minister has to deal with the protocol and put an end to the brinkmanship. And just a few minutes ago, the DUP has released a statement. Its leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, said that the protocol is incompatible with the restoration of devolved government. If the Prime Minister wants to see a fully functioning Stormont, then he must deal with it once and for all. He also said that while the focus is on unity within the Conservative Party, the unity of the United Kingdom must also be protected. So from the DUP's point of view, it's very much over to you, Prime Minister.
OK, Jordan, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get the views of some more voters. Our Midlands reporter, Ellie Pitt, is with some of them in Stratford-upon-Avon. Ellie, how is today's announcement going down there?
Well, Tom, even though perhaps Rishi Sunak was what the anticipated or expected winner that we thought was going to come out of this, it has received a range of views here in Stratford-on-Avon from Conservative voters. Some of them are with me now. We've got Sue Gibbs. Sue, what did you make of Rishi Sunak winning?
Well, to be quite honest, I was quite disappointed. I am a Conservative voter. I would have liked to have seen Boris returning. I think he's a good leader. He got us through COVID. He got Brexit done. And with all the chaos that was going on when he came to power, I think he handled the job really well. And I think, it was a shame when he went. If Boris hasn't come back, which he hasn't, I would rather have a general election and let us start again. That's my opinion.
Even though perhaps as a Conservative voter, it might not go to the Conservatives in a general election?
Well, no, I think the country needs a bit of an overhaul, really. We need to look at so many things, especially with the cost of living, people trying to pay their bills, look at the benefit system, the healthcare system. I know of people that have been on the waiting list for so long for, for example, hip operations, and they're so ill, and they've just been left to wait and have operations cancelled. There's so many things to look at, really. So yes, if Boris hasn't come back, let's have a general election and start again. Let the country decide.
Thank you very much. James and Sharon, you were in favour of Rishi, so what do you make of his success today?
Well, his real success will be in a result. basically he's got 2 years to fix the mess that we're in, and he said it was going to be difficult. There was difficult decisions. Well, yep, it's over to you now. You've got 2 years, because then that will make a significant decision or difference to our decision when it comes to an election, a general election in 2 years' time. So, yeah, we're keeping our fingers crossed that he's going to be the right man.
Sharon, what do you make of Rishi now being in charge?
Yeah, I'm pleased that he's in charge. Yes, he's got a lot of difficult decisions, and let's just hope he can turn it around for us so that, in 2 years' time, when there is a general election, Conservatives will get back in.
As Conservative supporters, what do you think the party has to do now to continue to get your support, but also, perhaps win that general election?
Well, I mean, the party's split, so therefore they've got to get behind the new Prime Minister, and we need to stop this soap opera, which seems to be going on and on and on. We've got to realise and focus on the fact that this mess has got to be fixed. So they've just got to get behind him. That's how I see it.
James, Sharon and Sue, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Well, Rishi might be in charge, but he's still got a lot to do to win over even Conservative voters here in Stratford-on-Avon.
OK, Ellie, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go back to Romilly Weeks in the Houses of Parliament, who is joined, I believe, by one of Penny Mordaunt's supporters.
Yes, disappointed Penny Mordaunt supporters. All morning they were trying to sound as confident as possible. When I last spoke to her team mid-morning, they were insisting they were pretty close to the 100 threshold, even though only around 25 had said so publicly. But one who did say so very publicly, a very vocal supporter of Penny Mordaunt, is Bob Seeley, who joins me now. Ms Seeley, you must be disappointed.
I am. Penny would have made a great Prime Minister. I wish she'd won this summer. That was probably her best chance, and I'm sorry she didn't quite make the numbers this time round. But we now have got to unite behind Rishi. We have got to come together, and we've got to relearn some wonderful Conservative values like loyalty and collective responsibility. And I look forward to everybody in our parliamentary party and the wider party doing that.
Why did you think that Penny Mordaunt, somebody with no economic experience, would be better than a former Chancellor to deal with the economic crisis that we're facing?
We have a number of crises at the moment, and we're dealing with these at a global level. Inflation, energy costs, post-COVID, and the rebuild post-COVID. So expertise is really important. But Jeremy Hunt is proving a very strong Chancellor, despite not having an economics background. Kwasi Kwarteng had an economics background, and sadly that didn't evolve in the way that we had hoped it would. So expertise is important, Romilly, but arguably what's more important is judgment. I felt that Penny had judgment in spades and would have been a great Prime Minister, but that is not a negative comment on the others. Rishi was a great Chancellor. Look, personally, he's a kid from Southampton, or from the Isle of Wight. He's self-made. He's a wonderful character. Genuinely, I was saying that before he won. I'll say it afterwards. And what we now need to do is to come together. So my choice was not a negative choice. Was I against Boris? Was I against Rishi? No. They're all good people. They've done fantastic things for the party. I wanted Penny to win. It wasn't going to happen. What we now need to do is relearn those values of loyalty, collective responsibility, collective leadership. The leadership is now settled. I have no doubt.
That's possible to relearn those qualities of loyalty after what we've seen over the last few months. I mean, even today, people are arguing about whether this should go to members or not. Some people suggesting there should be a general election.
Anyone who now wants to rock the boat is going to be given very, very short shrift by all our colleagues. The stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning is working out how I can get a better deal for the Isle of Wight. It's about St Mary's Hospital rebuild, it's about the railway pier rebuild, it's about getting a special needs school on the island. These are the things that motivate me and drive my life, my working life, and they're the things that motivate all my other colleagues, both in traditional blue seats and new Tory red wall seats. And I want my colleagues to be back here in a few years' time. And that means we have all got to come together. We have got to make this work. We've got to deliver for our constituents. We've got to deliver for the nation. The days of bickering, they're done.
And just quickly and briefly, should there be room for Penny Mordaunt in the Rishi Sunak campaign?
For sure. The good thing about Rishi, you could easily say about Penny, they are team players. Penny would have had an all-talents cabinet. I have no doubt that Rishi will be doing the same. And actually, I'm really sad that Penny didn't win. I'm incredibly optimistic about our future. It's wonderful that yet again the Conservatives have broken the mould. We've got our first British Asian Prime Minister of subcontinent background. That's wonderful news for us. Let's get on, let's govern well, let's get back to winning.
Bob Seeley, thank you very much. We've got to stop it there. So there you have it. Even from disappointed Penny Mordaunt supporters, the message is unite behind Rishi Sunak now.
OK, Romilly, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's come back to Robert on what has been another historic day. Maybe I could ask you finally then just to kind of your reflections on it. I mean, it's been a slightly bizarre weekend. We've ended up roughly where we thought we would with Rishi Sunak as the new Prime Minister. What's your feeling about that?
So look, history in terms of, first British Indian, first ethnic minority in 10 Downing Street. Great for the sense of this country as diverse, massive amounts on his plate. He's got just a few days to put together what's effectively a budget, that medium-term fiscal statement, which will see 30-40 billion pounds of public service cuts and tax rises. This is big and sort of stuff that's going to be unpopular, to be perfectly frank. He's got to fix the health service. He's got to fix that problem of migrants crossing the channel in boats. There's a massive controversy in the party about whether we need more immigration into the country to get the growth rate up. It's not going to be easy, but he will be filled with presumably excitement and enthusiasm. I mean, he's got the most powerful, it's the most powerful job in the country. Mm-hmm. He's wanted it for a long time. I'm going to make remind you of one little thing. Dominic Cummings, probably the most controversial person who ever worked in there, Boris Johnson's first big advisor. Actually, Rishi Sunak wouldn't be there if it weren't for Dominic Cummings, for better or worse, because he was the person who got rid of Sajid Javid, who was Chancellor, and brought Rishi Sunak in. Rishi Sunak doesn't like being reminded of that, but, to an extent, he is, or was, Cummings' protege.
OK, there we are. Robert, thank you very much. We'll have more later. For now, that is all from us here in Downing Street on another momentous afternoon in Westminster. Mary will bring you tonight's evening news at the usual time of 6:30. But from everyone here, bye-bye.